for me, it's a conversation for everyone. And those conversations need to start with the individual, right? And that's why I often talk about check my biases. Start with yourself. Start with how you are viewing those people who are different.
Let's go to Zimbabwe. And let's go at a time where there were no British there, therefore no European there. What is the role of a psychologist there? And how do you even describe a psychologist in that sense?
We are all on a journey in our understanding, right? Let's not be too harsh with each other. Let's take the space and time to identify where individuals are in their journey and to offer the support which they require to progress in their understanding. My name is Dr. Shungu Hilda Mgadzah, and I'm an education psychologist by background. So I trained over 30 years ago. I'm originally from Zimbabwe, and I came to the United Kingdom when I was 8 years old with my family. So in terms of my career, I worked initially as a teacher, teaching primary age school children. I then went on to train and as an education psychologist. And I then worked within, a number of local authorities within the United Kingdom. And from there, I worked as a senior leader within local authorities, managing educational psychologists and specialist teachers, really kind of focusing on managing the special, we call it the special educational needs and disability teams within the UK. And I kind of worked as a senior leader. And then from there, I set up my own private practice. And I also worked in higher education, and I did that for 8 years, teaching education psychologists, at kind of a master's level. And then I kind of set up my own practice, and now I work doing a number of different things. So I do a lot of kind of psychological expert witness work, which involves whether it be kind of clinical negligent claims or whether it be young people who kind of fall foul of the law, and I have to provide kind of fitness to plead testimony to kind of work out whether they were in their right minds when they committed a crime or did something wrong. And I also just do special educational needs appeals and psychological expert witness testimony. And then the rest of my time I spend working on the 6 stages framework. And I wrote my book, Understanding and Dealing with Everyday Racism, the 6 stages framework. I wrote that in May 2022. And I've devised a number of toolkits, which go alongside the book. So I do a lot of training for organizations, for schools. I do a lot of kind of individual work supporting people who are facing discrimination within the workplace. I suppose in a nutshell, the work I do and the way I see my purpose in the work I do is very much around looking at how we can remove barriers, right? And that's kind of barriers for largely people from the global majority, looking at what's getting in the way of people achieving to their full potential. And so that can kind of, it starts off with children, looking at kind of how we can support children within schools, looking at, young people as they get older, and then really kind of thinking about removing those barriers, especially around kind of the workplace, thinking about, how we, kind of remove barriers in terms of, issues around discrimination and any kind of challenges, which an individual may face within the workplace.
Oh, right. Thank you so much for that. There is a lot that is packed into that. Usually, this take out a lot of time to explore because they are really valuable. Not only that they are valuable, they are the centerpiece of what we are doing here, which is looking at the African diaspora, our interaction with other people. And being a psychologist now, you will help us to uncover a lot of things that people don't usually understand. And also because you are looking at education, the framework of education, what is it even based on, and all of that. And I also like the idea that you work with young people, particularly the one I think you are describing as a deviant. All those are also going to be very important for us to understand. But I wanted to spend a few seconds on you. Tell me, you are a young girl growing up in Zimbabwe. What do you see around you? That is important for me.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I mean, you can see that I'm now in my, I'm much older than I was when I first came to the UK. So my memory of Zimbabwe, is, it becomes less and less as the years go by. But I suppose the fondest memories I have are of me playing with my friend. I lived with my great aunt, who I called my Ambuya. And we lived in, in pretty much kind of, mud huts. So I've got, visions of kind of running around, playing around, these mud huts. And my great uncle would be sitting outside. Now, again, when I remember him, he was a black man, and he was Muslim. And I remember my Ambuya, and they'd be sitting outside by a log fire, and would be playing outside, with that kind of that backdrop of that scenery, really. And so my memories of Zimbabwe are very much memories of me as a young girl, memories of me in school. And I remember that, I was very good at running, so I always used to come top, but no, probably second in races. And I was also very, quite bright, when I was when I was in Zimbabwe, which again, hopefully we'll pick up on later. I sort of feel that when I came to the UK, I really took a back step, and that was a lot to do with, English as a second language, and some of the misdiagnosis, right, whereby people, teachers really, were identifying me as having remedial needs and as having special educational needs, when actually the issue was that actually I just had difficulties with the English language, and I needed time to settle. I didn't have learning difficulties.
Hmm. That is very important. That is really very important. But just for the sake of the clarity, how old were you when you left Zimbabwe to the UK?
Yeah, I came to the UK when I was 8 years old.
Okay, pretty young then. Now, did you experience what many African diaspora people, particularly of the younger generation, I'm not talking of those that arrived hundreds of years ago during slavery. I'm talking of those like you, for example, who came here. Me, for example, I came here, I was 24 years old. Pretty much I was already formed in Nigeria before I came. I finished my secondary school by then. So mine might be a little bit different. So when we get to Europe, we do have this cultural shock, some sort of, because what you are used to is different from what you are seeing now. I don't know how it was for you, but at least for me, as a 24-year-old man who come here and see things differently, for me, it was it was quite a shock. And also based on the work that I am doing, because I've done years of research about the presence of Africans in northern Italy, And of course, that is still what I'm doing today. You see, I'm just asking you questions to talk to me because I'm interested in the story. This is what I do, just talking about the story of people. So I've learned that the first Africans here in northern Italy, even for them, there was also a cultural shock because Europe is different from Africa. The way people see life is different from the way we see life. So when we come here, sometimes we have this shock. We need to sort of integrate ourselves into the system. It's not very easy, particularly like us that are coming from English-speaking country, coming to live in, for example, Italy is speaking the old Latin language, which are like French, Italian, Portuguese, or Spanish. They are different the way the language is set up. Of course, the language there is related to the culture and therefore the way of life of the people. So it was really sort of challenging for me at the time. So you are 8 years old. You find yourself in UK. What was it for you in the initial stage?
Yes, I mean, I came over, my parents were both nurses, so they had kind of, got jobs out here. And I think I came over and I didn't really recognize the challenges until we actually started school. And and for me, it was really kind of a combination of having to pick up the English language, having to make new friends, so that that was quite difficult, and really kind of not really being understood in terms of what my needs were, right? In terms of how to support me to access education fully. So, I think the biggest challenges I think which I faced were around education, around being put in those kind of special educational needs classes, and they used to be called remedial classes. Not because I had learning difficulties, but because the teachers just didn't know how to support someone who had English as an additional language. But aside from that, my transition, I think, into the UK, was relatively smooth. I think, but again, I hope I'll get a chance to say a bit more about that later. I sort of feel that, because of my parents' education, I assimilated, right? You know the word assimilation? I feel I assimilated into the UK pretty smoothly. So, I was, my parents, we lived in the East End of London, in a place called Plaistow. But my parents, being quite educated, decided to send us to schools outside of that area. So we'd travel into inner city London, into Camden, and we went to schools within that area. And the schools were a lot better. But the difficulty with that was that there were less black children, within those environments. So I was forced really to assimilate into my environment, quite quickly. And that's been a theme, I feel, for me as I've got older. And whilst assimilation is good, the impact on your your identity, your self-esteem, and the way you see yourself and your relationships can it can sometimes suffer, because of those experiences.
Thank you for that. You see, like I was saying before, some of these terms that might appear very simple, they're not really simple for people to understand. No? When you throw out the word there, assimilation, somebody might think that they understand it, but don't think you went in the closing part of it, explaining some of the dynamics that might come to pass at the end of the day. Now somebody's beginning to say, did I not hear that word correctly? So when you say assimilation, could you explain to us what does that mean?
Yeah, assimilation is really, I suppose in just explaining it simply, is when, people from a different culture in a different country come over to to another country, and they have to fit in, right? So there's often an element of you leave behind who you are so that you fit in a lot better. So when you're coming as a black person into the UK. you're maybe kind of forced to, I talk about hiding parts of who you are, right? In terms of your culture, in terms of your language, so that you can better move within the spaces of this new country. So my parents, whilst we used to speak Shona, which is one of the languages in Zimbabwe, would speak that at home, but they made it very clear that we needed to fit into to our new culture and our new country. So we worked hard to do that. We came into the schools, we made white friends, and education, was very important. It was kind of, but with that, sometimes, when and especially when you talk to Black children and families who are in white independent schools, right? With that, you sacrifice an element, sometimes, of who you are, and a lot of work has to be done to support your identity and to make sure that you don't forget who you are in terms of cultural terms and in terms of self-esteem and in terms of identity.
Thank you so much for that. I don't know how much we can really take on that so that we'll move towards your conversation today, because I'm really looking at inclusivity and this community, which is what we are going to spend most of our time on today. Also looking at your work and your practices, and we are coming to that. But I think now that even when we talk about culture and some of the things that we are losing because we are sort of trying to make other people feel good because we don't want to be different so that they don't misunderstand. So we try to be like them. But in this case, we are losing ourselves. So a couple of weeks ago, I was interviewing a Senegalese artist. And it was, I think you have said it before because I've interviewed the guy before, living in Milan, when I was doing a documentary about Pan-Africanism. That was like 2015. So he gave me a very nice pictorial description of what he wanted to say. That as African, we have left our horse on the ground and we climb onto another person's horse and we are on a destination. But later we're going to complain, but our horse is left alone. But now, if we were to reflect on that, it means that we should actually blame ourselves on that, at least to a greater extent, because we are the one that left our horse on the ground. That is why our horse is on the ground. We are riding another person's horse because we want the people to feel good. But the question now is, what about you? Who cares about your horse now? Because your horse is on the ground and almost useless on the ground, no? And of course, if we expand on it now, we can see why we are at a deficit in many areas, no? Because now you want our children to learn mathematics. They first of all need to learn English. Then they come to learn mathematics. It's natural that they're going to be in deficit because the other children are learning mathematics. They're not learning another language to learn mathematics. And this is true now, even when we are talking about chemistry, physics, astronomy, because I have interviewed an expert, luckily also from Zimbabwe, but of course, he's in South Africa. He's an education expert too. And he have also hammered on this, that it is very important for us if we can manage to recover those bases. They are the basic setup of life. Because if we are using other people's lenses to see reality, we are always going to be in deficit because we are going to play catch up. We are trying to catch up with other people. But we don't need to play catch up. We just need to evolve and use all the elements that we already have all the bases. So that is why I say maybe we might not really have a lot of time to go there because they are important for me. Because in this podcast, we are traveling 360 degrees about African reality. We are not really focusing only on history or on philosophy or on psychology. Because in Africa, it is said that everything is connected. You can't just talk about the woman without talking about the man, because the man is related to the woman, but the man and the woman, they're living in a society. In a society, there are a lot of elements. We need to play with all of them all the time, because no one is actually exempted. All right. Having said that, having said that, yeah,
Can
please
I
say
say
something.
something? I think that's I think that's really important, and that's, I suppose, what I take from that. And I often talk about the analogy of a jigsaw puzzle, right? And I see individuals as having many pieces which connect them in terms of what makes up your true self. And I suppose what you were saying really kind of makes me think about how do we form and how do we support children and young people and also adults to ensure that they have a holistic sense of the self, right? So I think sometimes when you're coming into a new country and when you're kind of maybe hiding parts of yourself because you're trying to fit in, sometimes some of those cultural elements kind of get lost, and that can impact on your identity, that can impact on your self-esteem, and that can also cause problems around mental health and mental well-being.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that clarification. It is important. All right, before we move into what you are doing today, because that is where we are moving into just now, but I'm interested in the why. Why do you think a lot of people, okay, now in this case, we're looking at people that are coming from Africa in the recent time. Again, I'm not looking at people that have come here through slavery, who didn't have the chance to be able to carry all the element of the culture, because that culture was actually beaten out of them through force, through iron, through brutality. The worst form of brutality was actually meted out on them to make them forget their culture. But we didn't really suffer that, in the sense of when we come here, nobody is actually beating out the culture in us, but we are still losing the culture. What is responsible for that?
Well, I think it's interesting that you say nobody's beating out the culture, from you, but actually, I think they are. I think, but they're just doing it using different tools, right? And I think, in a sense, the process of assimilation is that you're actually taught that your culture, your language, your people are not as valued and are not as important as those of the dominant white society. So I think the process of kind of beating out, that sense of self and who you are is done in a very different and subtle way, but the mental health effects can be as damaging as if that was done by physical force.
Thank you for that. We'll have time to touch this mental head later, because it's prevalent in the African diaspora community. I've spoken to a lot of people in the UK, and a lot of people have complained about it. I know it's something that is going to go even larger if we are not careful, because it is important, it is fundamental that we address that. All right, now, tell me, how did you get into the trajectory of being a psychologist? What led you to that? What influenced your decision of becoming a psychologist?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question. I was studying at a polytechnic called Central London. It's now the University of Westminster. And when I was there, I set up a problem page. So I used to write for the university magazine. So I started a problem page called Dear Hilda, and Hilda is my middle name. So I was basically inviting my fellow students to write in with their problems, and I would answer them. So at that stage, I was doing my psychology degree, and I was doing this problem page on the side. And most of the time, Obehi, we actually used to make up the problems because we didn't always get them to begin with. And then eventually, as the students realized what we were doing, they would write in, Dear Hilda, such and such problem, and I would answer that. And one of the people who worked within the union approached me and said, Gosh, you're really good at this. Have you thought about becoming a psychologist and doing this as part of as a professional career? And he said to me, I've got a friend who works in Hackney. She's an educational psychologist. Why don't you go and see her and see what you think and see whether that might be the job you decide to do? So off I went, and this is where connections, right? The value of networking and connections is so important. I went and spent a day with this brilliant psychologist. Her name was Veronica Finch. She was a white woman, and she really she took me around, and I shadowed her for the day, seeing the job she was doing. And at the end of that, I kind of decided, yes, I could see myself doing this. The job has got a sense of purpose. I'd be working with young people, I would be using psychology. And that really kind of set me on that trajectory. And, I knew the qualifications I needed in order to achieve that.
Wow, that is beautiful. That sense of
But
purpose. Yeah.
I often wonder, because in a sense that's what was opened up for me, with that opportunity. It was like, yeah, that was, the possibility. But I sometimes wonder about the possibilities I was not aware of, right? And I do think that sometimes connections are so important. And I think with young people in particular, it's so important to make them aware of what the choices are and what opportunities lie ahead, and to provide those connections so that they can see what's possible for their life.
And you said something. Who knows what possibility that we are not even tapping into? Because I think that there is an infinite possibility that we really do have.
Absolutely.
Because now you enter, or somebody help you to open a bus, and you travel that trajectory like in a rabbit hole, and you find yourself doing what you are doing today, which means you could have actually been doing something different. And maybe in another field, it will still be you, and you will still be doing it really beautifully well. So we are really limitless in what we can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's about people opening up those those opportunities and showing young people just what they can do and what they're capable of. And that sometimes for a lot of young people, they're not given, they're not, that's not opened up to them. They're not given those opportunities. Those connections are not made available to them. So they limit themselves in what's possible in terms of their choices and their career, and who they can be in life.
All right. Psychology. What does it even mean? What is psychology?
Yeah, so psychology is essentially the study of human behavior. It's very much about looking at, understanding, human behavior, and understanding, what impacts, on our ability to learn. So we talk about cognition and learning. We talk about mental health and well-being. So it's looking at understanding the things which impact on a person's well-being and emotional health. Um, and and it's also about the study of looking at kind of human interactions, right? How do we communicate with each other? So social communication and interaction, and really kind of thinking about, things like, and especially today, things like, relatedness and empathy, and connection. So it's about looking at all of those different aspects and understanding, what, kind of, how individuals, how human beings function, and what impacts on who they are. So issues around identity, around self-esteem, and bringing all of that together to understand the individual, and how they relate with others in their everyday life.
All right, Hilda, I want you to help me do something. Let's go to Zimbabwe, and let's go at a time where there were no British there, therefore no European there. What is the role of a psychologist there? And how do you even describe a psychologist in that sense?
Interesting. Yeah, I'm trying to understand that. So, um, The role of the psychologist during a time like that, right at the beginning, where there were no white people around, my guess is, the role of the psychologist would be, let's start with schools, looking at children's learning, getting a sense of how we can optimize and maximize children's learning. The role of the psychologist would be around looking at relationships and how, relationships within families, between, a husband and a wife, how we support those relationships to be positive and to be functional. The role of the psychologist would be, so you've got different types of psychologists. You've got educational, you've got forensic psychologists, you've got clinical psychologists who look around at things around mental health and everything else. So the psychologists during that time would be really looking at, how we better understand human behavior and how we support people to live, full and fun and to live fully, in their lives and to interact with others in a positive way.
All right. You see, I'm asking the question because sometimes I have tried to describe a certain function in the pre-colonial African as psychologists that were not actually said called psychologists in our way, in what we studied in school. In that, when you sleep in the night, you have a dream and you are scared. You wake up, you go meet somebody. Of course, you don't meet everybody. You go meet certain people in the society, maybe that you know that you can talk to. You go to meet these people or this person. You will explain your dream to this person. Of course, I'm using dream as just one, but there are many other things. It could be that maybe your family is not functioning well, your child is behaving a certain way. You will usually take him or her to this same person, and you will engage in a conversation where you will be asked a series of questions. And at the end of the day, something will be prescribed to you on what to do to resolve that problem. And eventually the problem will be resolved. Okay, this will be interpreted in different culture. We understand this. Sometimes you are told that these are witch daughter, which of course is really very offensive, at least from the way I see it. So sometimes I try to think that that is the work of a psychologist, which is to say, therefore, that it have always been around us. Maybe I am wrong because I'm not a psychologist. What do you say about that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think what you're picking up on is really kind of the basic role of a psychologist is about about really kind of being there to listen to people, right, and being there to problem solve and to support others to problem solve. And I think that is that function of listening and problem solving and and supporting others to introspect and to to really kind of solve any kind of concerns they may have. That function was probably was carried out by many others within communities, right? So I think the role of the elder within African communities, the role of, or even, in Zimbabwe, we talk about the Nganga, which, is kind of traditionally the witch doctor. People would go to those, elders and people within communities to talk about their concerns and to seek support and to seek direction. So I think the role of the psychologist has evolved, over the years into, combining those necessary skills and those necessary functions which are required within society.
Okay. Now you are in the field of education, but as we move into that, I am sort of trying to see if there are tools that you use, because in the example that I was talking about before, in my language, which is Esan, south of Nigeria, a person you will go to meet that will help you to understand what is happening in your life, it will be called a diviner. In my language, it's called Obo. That when you meet him, you will usually he will involve in a certain form of rituals, a kind of divination, because when you have been asked question, you respond. He tries to communicate. He tries to do certain practices that help him or her understand what is happening to you before the prescription is given to you. So there are usually instruments that he or she is using to help you better overcome your problem. So the instrument. Now, what type of instrument would you use to help somebody understand what they are passing through? Because, of course, looking at it from a Euro-Western idea today, because you are living in the UK.
Yeah, and I think, and that really very much links to my book, right? So my book has got a number of different instruments or toolkits to help people navigate and understand racism, right? And it focuses not just on racism, but also other forms of discrimination. So, one of the instruments which I use, related to my book, is called the prejudice racism spectrum. And it's really designed to give individuals the language to talk about their experiences around discrimination and around racism. And we use this as a toolkit, not only for adults, but also within schools. So it's supporting young people to make sense of some of the discrimination and some of the behaviors like microaggressions that they may face, within a school setting. No, but those are toolkits which I've devised around my work around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, in terms of my role as an educational psychologist, there are lots of other toolkits which are very much kind of related to measuring, a child or an adult's cognitive functioning. So I'll use different assessment tools to try and understand, how how a person is functioning in their learning and in their areas of their kind of their IQ, really kind of looking at how they're functioning in different areas. But with those tools, there can be problems, right? Because those tools are basically Eurocentric. They've been designed on populations, largely, you find that they're designed on populations which don't include many people from the global majority. So we need to take care when we're using those tools to ensure that we're not, discriminating or labeling certain groups as, in the past, they used to talk about being educationally subnormal. There was a book which was written about, Black children and Black people, being educationally subnormal. But the measurements which were being used to measure cognitive functioning and abilities, right, within schools, those tools were in themselves flawed. They didn't take into account the differences. They were not standardized, on populations which included a wide range of people from, mainly kind of people from the global majority and Black people. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's look at that closely. I don't know how I want to really talk about this, but I am trying to imagine that the European or the Euro-Western have a certain idea of life, which is fine. But I think where we had a problem is where this way of life of the European was imposed on everybody as a way of life of humanity. Because if it was supposed to be the way of life of humanity, it should have been designed putting every element of humanity into it so that it becomes the way of life of humanity. Therefore, everybody will be represented. That would be right. But now, the European probably didn't have enough resources to do this because I think what they did in Africa, looking at African situation, is that they were pretty much in haste. So when they came in, they didn't understand almost nothing about the culture they were dealing with. Because to deal with people is very complicated. You need to understand their language. You need to understand the significance of their practices. Because they didn't have the time and the logistics to do that, most of this thing, they will do it through interpretation. Somebody who will tell them this is what the local people are saying that this one means. They would then take that and use it to sort of frame a reality. But that reality is very superficial, because to say what something means, you really need to understand it deeper. It's not just the name. It's more than just the name. So what I'm trying to say here is that I think the European way of life cannot be the way of life of humanity. It's the European way of life. I'm trying to see now that we are running into this deficit because, like the artist I was interviewing before said, we are riding on another person's horse. It doesn't necessarily mean that this is a wrong thing for the European, but I'm not a European. How do we include me in it? Or how do we allow me to ride my own horse without necessarily demonizing me or say that what I'm doing is wrong because it is not a European style? I am not a European. How do we do this so that we can save people from this mental health situation? Because I think it is complicated. It is dangerous also. Now, let me reframe it like this. The educational system that we have in Africa is basically set up in a way that we are educated to be like the European. But we are not living in a European society. We do not live in their reality. How possibly can we do that? Of course, what is going to happen is that we have people that are educated, but they are educated away from their society. They will never provide a solution to the society because the tools, the instrument that was used to educate them were foreign to them. A good example, in 2010, I wrote a book that I titled Underdevelopment in Africa, My Hands Are Clean. Of course, even though the thesis of the book was actually trying to critique the African, saying that we need to look for our responsibility in what is happening to us, I think it is also important to acknowledge that there is a game that we are involved in, that it is not designed by us. How could you teach a child in Ghana about snow if all his life he will never see snow? Why would snow be included in the curriculum? What is the reason? Because I want to really be very specific that a typical European, whether in Germany, in France, or in Italy, or in UK, have no idea when you make mention of the word Harmattan. Harmattan is something that will look like a winter for Europe, but for West Africa, that is what we are experiencing. Now, it is not important for the child growing up in Berlin to be taught about Harmattan, because that is not part of the reality. That is where I think we are having a problem here, in that we are educating people away from what they are. Therefore, we are educating them to be confused. I don't know, maybe I'm overstressing it here.
Yes, I think there's a lot in what you've said, and I suppose when you were talking, at the beginning, I was actually thinking about how do we understand different behaviors? How do we understand and the standards which have been set? And I think that sometimes there's a misinterpretation of behaviors, of Black people, because they're being viewed at through the lenses, that have been set, essentially, kind of Eurocentric models. So I think, so for example, an example which comes to mind is very much around children and young people within schools, where there's, certainly within the UK, there's a disproportionate number of Black children who are identified as having behavioral difficulties. And the thing is that the way that the way their behavior is interpreted is through discriminatory lenses. And I think, so for me, that there's something about actually the tools of measurement, i.e. whether we're talking about psychometrics or assessment tools, but also the lenses by which those people who are in power, either teachers or managers or leaders, the lenses through which they view and understand the behaviors and the performance of Black people. And I think, there's a lot of kind of misinterpretation and stereotypes and labeling which comes with those lenses.
Yeah, that is very important. That is very important now. You see, I was interviewing just to sort of come in line with what you're saying, to sort of find out where we are getting it wrong and where we might fix it. No, so I was interviewing this expert from Congo. We're talking about Congo religion, and they were telling me what the colonialists did at the time. No, when they came in, they were trying to understand what is the spirituality of the people. So of course they were asking. So somebody told them a particular name that they used to refer to, I think, an ancestor or something. Now, the European, picked that and said that is the name of God. Therefore, these people are worshiping this individual. But that is not what it means. So the reality actually was missing in the interpretation. I think this is found in very many places, that they don't, because it is expensive. Okay, let me bring it home to something that is very common here. That in the educational system that we have today, I think maybe we might have time to expand on that a little, looking at how the world is turning into today. The school do not have enough resources to really educate the children. That is for sure. Instead, they do generalization where they have a certain standard. They want everybody to fall into that. But that is a disservice to the people, because the school, it really were to be what it was supposed to be, was to make sure that every child is educated to be the best that the child can be, not the best copy of another child or a program that is designed. This is partly because sometimes the school or the government do not have enough resources to do that, so they just generalize it, no? But that is limiting. Maybe today, because of technology, we might look for a way to educate ourselves, because we see now that we pass through that educational system. We sort of ask ourselves when we come out, okay, then yes, because we have gone out of the Industrial Revolution now, where you go to school, you finish, then just go into the factory and start to work. But it's not like that anymore. There is no factory like that anymore. Where are we supposed to fix this problem so that people do not go through a program and when they come out, they don't find themselves? Because school was supposed to help you find yourself, not find you becoming a copy of something or somebody. Could you share on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's really important, and that's one of the things. Certainly when I'm working with schools and when I'm working with families and young people, I really, and also with organizations, I try to bring in. It's something about ensuring that we take on board and we support the holistic child, taking into account the child and whether it be the adult's cultural background and their kind of their strengths and interests, right? And that in a sense we shouldn't be measuring that against kind of a mold of what a well-functioning person looks like. We really need to be working with the individual and understanding what what makes up that person. Understanding their cultural background, understanding how to support their cultural well-being and emotional well-being. And I think in one of the things I often come across, especially within schools, is that tendency, as I've said, to misinterpret the behaviors of Black children. So I don't know whether you've heard of the term adultification, where young Black children are seen as much more adult and much more, they're really not seen as innocent and young and childlike, but their behavior is interpreted through the lenses of deviance and of misbehavior and so forth. And as a result, you actually get a lot of kind of a disproportionate number of Black children being excluded from school, being labeled as having behavioral difficulties, when in fact there is that kind of that misinterpretation and lack of understanding about those behaviors. So I think, a lot of the work I do with schools is really asking them to consider how they support the cultural needs of young Black children. And it's really interesting because, the other week I was working with, with a school, and they basically say to me, and I'd been asking them these questions about, okay, so what training has your school done around the area of equality, diversity, and inclusion? How many, ethnic minority teachers do you have, or teachers from the global majority within your school? How are you embedding the curriculum? How are you embedding diversity, equity, and inclusion within the curriculum? And I was asking them all of these questions to better understand how that particular school were meeting the needs of a Black child. So by asking them the questions about them as a school, I was better able to understand the experiences of that Black child within that school. Is the school inclusive? Is it a school which is looking at kind of becoming more anti-racist, or is it a school which is in denial about some of the work which needs to be done? And and the schools, and it was really interesting because the head teacher said to me, but surely, no, it was the Senko, the special educational needs coordinator, challenged me and sort of said to me, but your role as an educational psychologist should only be focusing on assessing the child's needs, not asking questions about what we're doing as adults, within the school. And it was really interesting that lack of understanding about, unless we delve deeply into understanding schools and unless we are brave enough to challenge systems that can discriminate against children from the global majority, then actually we fail to fully understand the experiences of the children we're working with.
Thank you so much for that. This is a very important conversation. All right. Now, I was telling you that I did a number of years researching about the presence of Africans in Northern Italy. That is actually where we came from. That is where this podcast came from. Now, in that project, I published 2 books. One is The Color of Our Children. One is the Journey Africans in Verona, which was about the experiences of the first Africans here. The second part was the educational system in Veneto region. How that project actually started was because there was a child of a Ghanaian parent who was of a school age, 6 years. He was supposed to start school. A lot of stories actually happen around that. So there is this discrimination that is going on within the school system that people don't want to talk about. And again, the question is whether the society is actually prepared for what it is, not what it can be. The society is already what it is. For example, former Prime Minister of Italy, now is late, Silvio Berlusconi, once said that Italy, some people pronounce it like that, is not a multicultural society. But I don't know if the ex-Prime Minister was actually right. Of course, I am sure that he wasn't right. Because multicultural essentially means multiple cultures in society. If we look at Italy, just a small country, we see that there are different cultures that are interweaving together. Because the people from the northern part of Italy are different from the people in the southern part of Italy. This is evident in their culture, even in their tonation, in everything, in dressing. I understand that a lot of work has been done to sort of unify the people and all of that. Yes, but we don't need to dilute the components that make up the whole. And of course, this becomes very important now when they are looking at people that are just coming in. But these people that are just coming in have been here for 40 years, 50 years. They have raised children. The children are growing up in the school system, in the society. They are working in different places. Where is the place of these people in this society? Sometimes in Italy, it can be a little bit more complicated, but I think it is the same everywhere. Because now we are saying, how do we accommodate this new being in the society? Because you can call me an immigrant, I will still accept it, even though I've been living in Italy for 20 years. But what about my son? My son was born here. In Italian law, even if you are born here, you still need to take a resident permit, which means that you are like an immigrant, even though you are born here in Italy. It is funny, some people don't think it is abnormal that a child that was born here in the hospital here need to have a resident, not a permit would mean that they are giving you the authorization to stay here. But if you were born here, where could they send you to anyway? You are 17, you are 14 years old, so they need to deport you to a country where you are coming from. Is that the reason in the opposite of that, meaning you have a resident to stay here? It can be really complicated quite quickly. But what I want to say is, I think it is important that we help these people. By that, I mean this second generation or the third generation, these children that are born in the European society that might not necessarily be by blood, looking at whether you are traditionally German, traditionally French, but they are here. If a war break out in UK, you don't want to tell me that you will say, okay, well, you are not going to join because this is a war for the UK people. You are a UK citizen because your parents have been from Ireland. You will be sent to the war. Everybody will be sent to the war. These children are working, their parents are working, they are paying tax to the UK government, they are paying tax to the German government, paying tax to the French government. If a war break out between Germany and France and people of African descent are there fighting, is there any of them that is going to die a lesser death and therefore we don't need to respect him? Or maybe they are working in the factory. Because you are an immigrant, you are not really going to pay good tax. You are not even going to pay tax at all. For this reason, you are not respected, you are not recognized. I am trying to understand the rationale behind this official discrimination in the school system and therefore also in the society.
Yes, no, absolutely. And I think what you're speaking to is really around kind of what it means to be an inclusive society, right? And really kind of asking those questions about how do we measure the value of different individuals within society? And are Black people and ethnic minorities considered to be less important and less valuable within our societies? And that really is why I wrote my book, Understanding and Dealing with Everyday Racism, the 6 Stages Framework. Because within that, the framework I use is very much about understanding how inclusive different environments are and how inclusive different individuals are. So, I look at kind of how different people present at the different stages. So there's 6 stages. You start from stage +1, and then +2, +3, +4, +5, +6. And each stage describes how different people show up in terms of their understanding and ability to deal with racism or any other form of discrimination. But let's stick with racism. So for those who are at stage +1, that's really where people, are ignorant and in denial and and really kind of, just really ignorant, in denial of issues of race, and issues of difference. And then those who are at stage two, it's really kind of where people are avoidant of talking about these issues. Now, the reason I'm describing these stages is that I think our governments fall within those stages. So within the UK, there was a paper written, last year. I think it was last year. From the commission. I think it was, from one of the commissions of the government, and they were talking about kind of victim mentality, and they were saying, well, actually, racism doesn't exist anymore. So very similar to, some of the things you've been saying. Racism doesn't exist anymore. It's all in the mind of the victims. It's all in the mind of, of these Black people or these people from the global majority. But we're not a racist country, and they were really kind of, dismissing the idea that there was any form of racism. Those behaviors for me fall within the kind of the 6 stages framework. It's stages +1 and +2. That almost like avoidance and denial, the ignorance and the kind of repeated assertions that the experiences of Black people and the experiences of ethnic minorities are not valid. That to me talks about governments and people who are operating at +1 and +2 of the 6 stages framework. Stage 3 is where people are recognizing what the issues are. Stage +4 is where people are open to learning and really, really kind of, seeking to broaden their understanding. Stage 5, people are developing in that understanding. And stage 6 is where people are taking up leadership roles in fostering greater understanding and greater inclusion about those who are, different, and those who are Black. So I think, the challenges we face, not only within schools, not only within the workplace, but these are challenges I feel our governments have yet to fully grasp, and to really ask the questions about, well, actually, where are we in our journey towards understanding and dealing with racism? And currently, from reading some of those reports last year, I could only conclude that the UK government is at stage 2 of the 6 stages framework. They've got a long way to go before they fully understand what racism is, and before they fully understand the experiences of Black people in the UK and the challenges that they face in navigating racism on a daily basis, whether that be the experiences of young Black children in schools, or whether that be the experiences of adults within workspaces which are racist and which are discriminatory, or whether that be the experiences of young Black people and adults who come up against the judicial system, which doesn't necessarily view them through the lenses that it would view someone if they were white.
Thank you for that. And that is really important. We'll spend some time on that book just now, because you are striking a fundamental point there. And I think a lot of people in the Euro-Western society enjoy being in the denial. Because it's not that they don't know, it's not that they are not able to know, it's not that the resources are not there. Because they are not the direct victim, they want everybody to forget it. You see, in the United States, where, of course, I've interviewed a lot of scholars, the government doesn't want people to talk about critical race theory, plus many other issues, because they feel, again, in denial, that by talking about the horror that were committed against other people in the society, they are going to make the children of the perpetrator of those acts feel guilty. But what kind of rationale is that? That now we need to forget what have happened before and just move on. Move on to where? We can't move on.
No,
We need
exactly.
to address what have happened before, because what have happened before is what led us to where we are today. To move on at all, we first of all need to understand that and then choose to move on based on the understanding that we know what has happened. Now, nobody want to talk about the millions of people that were massacred in Congo. For many Europeans, it doesn't exist because it didn't happen to them. But it happened to people. The first prime minister of Congo were not only he was actually gassed in that he was put in acid. They want us to forget the story because it's not about them. Now, this is why here in Obehi podcast and also in our storytelling series, we are reminding the people of African descent that this is our story. This is our responsibility to do. Nobody is coming to do the story for us. It is we that decide whether the story is relevant or is not relevant. It doesn't depend on the Euro-Western philosophy or idea to say, okay, we have go beyond that. No, you see, it is not the perpetrator that decide that, okay, it is not offensive what I've done to you. No, it doesn't depend on you. What you did, you have done that. That is your part. It depends on who you have done it to say whether I am offended or not. You don't decide whether what you say is offensive to me. I am the one that tell you whether it's offensive to me.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And I think, that's why within my book I talk about the work starts with everyone, right? This is not just work that white people need to do. This is not just work that white governments need to do, right? This is not just work that, certain parts of the country need to do. It's work that we all need to do. So I think for me, the starting point is about understanding biases, right? And understanding discrimination. And it's so important that we start there. And we use that as a tool for looking at how those biases and discriminations then get in the way. So I totally understand that, there's a need to not only look at, how Africans or, and how Black people are viewed, but I think essentially, being quite honest, some of this work also needs to be looking at some of the factions and some of the divisions between, between communities, within Africa, right? We need to be looking at the biases, right? So, for example, when I think about, different, whether we're talking about different tribes, whether we're talking about different groupings, you hear time and time again that actually they are divisions, right? So the whole kind of conversation around inclusiveness, for me, is a conversation for everyone. And those conversations need to start with the individual, right? And that's why I often talk about check my biases. Start with yourself. Start with how you are viewing those people who are different. And and you're absolutely right that for a lot of people, they would rather, one of the concepts I talk about within my book is called caves of privilege. They would rather remain in their caves, right? Which keeps them away from actually engaging and interacting with those who are different. When they're in their caves, they feel safe. They feel they don't have to relate with those who are different. But actually, that causes that kind of that exclusion and some of the divisions, which we're seeing around the world today. No, I wrote a blog just the other day where I was saying no one life is more valuable than another. If you cut me, I bleed. If I cut you, you bleed. No, we need to get better at understanding differences, not only in binary terms, black and white, but also within groups. A few years ago, there was an Asian woman called Yasmin Alabaya Brown, I think her name is. Sorry, I've got the name. I've probably got the name mixed up. But she wrote an article about the racism experienced by Black people from from Southern Asians. And one of the things she said was, we've got to be honest. It's not just white people who are racist against Blacks. Racism also exists within Asian communities. So then there's a need for us to look at those interactions and how racism plays out. We need to look at the experience of Black people. We need to look at the impact from governments, but we also need to take the lens to look at actually what's happening within communities, within Black groups, and actually how some of those biases and discriminations play out.
Thank you for that. I don't know. No one can say that it's a very simple thing to just cut with your finger. This is a complicated work. But of course, we need to do the work, even though it is complicated, because it is important for our survival depends on it. We cannot remain like this forever. We need to fix the problem. There is no way you can fix the problem without first understanding the root cause of the problem. So that is where I think many people of African descent, particularly those who are able to study, I'm not only looking at academic study, but to study the situation, the environmental intelligence, where you are, understand the emotion of the people, the story, because we are actually carrying generation of story. If we can just pay attention to our body, to our language, this story can be understood. So let's understand ourselves, understand where these epigenetic traumas are coming from. We can heal ourselves. I believe we can, but there is no way we can heal ourselves by just being on the surface. Now, I want to share something with you. You see, I did 4 episodes with assistant professor. He's also coming from Zimbabwe, but in the US. In one of the episodes, he talked about personhood. And in his description of personhood, I found it is one of the most important messages I've gotten in this podcast. That it is basically looking at the description of what a man or what a person is. In that, as a person, of course, since from an African perspective, you are seen not just as an individual in and of itself, so you are just separate. No, that you are an entity that is connected to what have been before you, which is there for your ancestors, the people that have been before you. You are carrying their DNA. Do you know that a lot of Africans will be shivering to mention the name ancestors? A lot of Africans will they don't want to hear it at all. So he is saying in this description of personhood that your definition as a person include also your ancestors. Include where you are today, which is you physically present, and it refers to the unborn too, those who will be born years from now. That might appear to be very ordinary, but it is not ordinary, it is deep. In that if your ancestors have suffered any pain, you are carrying that pain. If you can heal yourself.
We refer to that as kind of that generational trauma. And I think you're absolutely right. I think there is something about understanding identities and understanding that, who I am as an individual doesn't just start, as you say, it doesn't start with me, right? It's been influenced by others who've come before me, whether that be parents, but also other ancestors. So it's about understanding the impact of all of that in terms of on your identity and who you are.
Thank you so much for that. Because if you expand on that, it actually responds to all the conversation that we have had and that we will ever have. In that, if I know that the decision I'm taking now is not just about me physically present, I'm going to be careful the decision I'm going to take because it affects a generation of people after me. If I know that generation of people is me, therefore, I need to take a decision that is going to affect them positively. Because if you look around now in Africa, in most of the things that we are doing, because we are doing something that are wrong in most of the cases too, we are not conscious of the fact that those that are unborn are part of us. Because if we understand that, then it wouldn't make sense that a politician in Nigeria will steal all the money and go hide it in Switzerland. How is that going to affect the people that are unborn, which are part of you? You mean you don't understand that? Because if you understand that, you are going to ask, but we need to build this road so that they can, when they are born, they will live in a better society. That the sacrifices you are making now is for them, which is also about you, because you will be here even when you are dead, because your life is part of what is going to be existing then. If you know this, you will build a better society, because it's not just about you here now. It's about extended you.
And it's, and I think what you're talking about is, it's something I cover within my book, because it really speaks to what are our values, right? What values shape us as individuals. And I think what you're speaking to is very much the fact that actually, we need to be aware of how those values impact on others, and that we don't exist in isolation, right? So when you talk about personhood, I think, there's something about selflessness. There's something about understanding that, I can only exist because of those who have come before me. And as you've said, that will, that my actions and my behaviors will impact on those who have come after me. And, and I do think that a lot of this, when I think about, understanding and dealing with racism and fostering inclusive environments and inclusive societies, coming back to my role as a psychologist, I think a lot of the problems that exist are around fear. Fear, and that fear is really kind of what keeps people at stages, whether it be +1 or -1 of the 6 stages framework. The fear stops us having the conversations and exploring, what our values are, but also how those values impact on those around us.
Thank you so much for that. Now, looking at your book, this is stages framework. What do you say is the central message of this book that you want to communicate to the people?
Yeah, I mean, the central message is really that we are all human beings, right? We are all human beings, and human beings have biases. I think that sometimes when we're talking about racism, people, we tend to look at racism as a binary thing. You're either racist or you're not. And often, if I was to say to a white colleague, I'm concerned about, something you've said, you might get this response of, oh my goodness, are you calling me a racist? The doors shut down pretty quickly. So there's never any conversation. There's never any discussion. My book is all about supporting people to explore their biases, understand what their biases are, but also keeping the doors open to the conversations we need to have about discrimination and racism. And in order to keep those conversations open, we need to support people to understand racism as a spectrum. So that rather than understanding it just as black and white, you're racist or you're not, it's actually about looking at the different grades of racism. And don't get me wrong, right? Even low-key racism. So when you're looking at different grades, you're looking at racial slurs, you're looking at microaggressions, you're looking at sometimes what people call banter, right? And jokes, racial banter and jokes. And that is what I describe as kind of low-key racism. But just because it's low-key, it doesn't mean that the impact of it on the person receiving it is any less, right? But it's about giving the language and giving a framework for keeping the doors open to support people to have these conversations, so that if I go to my white colleague and I say to them, well, actually, what I didn't like was your behavior at that time. When you say this in the meeting, I was concerned about your behavior. I was concerned about the language you used. And this is where that language and behavior falls on the prejudice racism spectrum. I can pinpoint on a spectrum of behaviors, where that behavior falls. It's more likely that by labeling the behavior and talking about the language and the behavior I'm seeing, that person is less likely to retreat into their caves of privilege. They're more likely to remain in the room, and they're more likely to become more educated and gain a better understanding of what it was about their behavior that was offensive to me as a Black person.
Okay. Now, I have a curiosity. These people, is it that they don't know that what they are saying is offensive, therefore they are just simply ignorant, or they know that it is offensive and they say it all the same because, like, you can't do anything about it. I can just insult you, something like that.
Okay, and I think that's a really good question. And my answer would be that there'll be some people don't know that what they're saying is offensive, right? When we're talking about low key, right? If you call someone, colored rather than Black, right? Or for example, there was the story within the UK of Lady Hussey, and she was a royal aide working within Buckingham Palace. And she basically, on it was a charity event. They did some people visiting Buckingham Palace, and she was having a conversation with a woman called Ngozi Fulani, who is a charity worker, a Black woman. And she basically said to Ngozi something like, where are you from? And when Ngozi said, well, actually, I'm from, the UK, whatever. She said, no, where are you really from? And, and she continued to ask this question despite receiving an answer as to where this charity worker was from. Following that, there was a whole conversation about, well, was Lady Hussey being racist? Is asking someone where you from, where you really from, is that being racist? And I think there's something about breaking down. For some people, there's something about explaining and breaking down why that question can be offensive, whilst giving them the opportunity to learn, and whilst not cancelling them, right? We talk about cancel culture, whilst not cancelling them and labeling them as racist. So for some people, there is an ignorance and there is something about needing to be supported to learn. And those are people who are largely on the 6 stages framework, on the positive axis of the 6 stages framework, i.e. +1 to +6. The 6 stages framework also has a negative axis, which goes from -1 to -6. Now, the people who exist on the negative axis will be aware that their behavior is offensive and that what they're saying is not right. And the support needed for those people is different from the support needed for people who are on the positive axis.
All right. I want you to help me clarify something else. At what point do you say that what somebody said to you is wrong? Is it when the person is said by another person that look like you, or when maybe the person that said it is somebody that is different from you, or maybe in the situation, the circumstances, or the way that it is said, or exactly what it is said? Help me clarify that.
I think to a large extent, it's, as a psychologist, I focus on behaviors. I focus on what's being said, not necessarily who is saying it, right? Even though there have been a lot of discussions, haven't they? We've seen, for example, in America, the use of the N-word. People have said, well, actually, if I'm Black, I can use it, but if someone is white, they can't use it, right? But my focus is very much on the language which is being used, the behaviors, and supporting people to understand discriminatory and racist behaviors. and supporting them to understand why those behaviors are offensive. But as well, there's work to be done with people who are at the receiving end of those behaviors and of those kind of discriminatory and racist behaviors. And so some of the work which needs to be done is supporting those people to have the language to describe their experiences. So, for example, some of the work I'm doing at the moment is supporting people who have raised grievances and complaints within the workplace, Black people who've raised grievances within the workplace. And often those people will come to me and they'll be able to describe the unease they felt when their manager said something to them, but they won't be able to articulate exactly why that behavior was either racist or discriminatory. So some of the work is about giving our people the language to describe their experiences so that they can better challenge those behaviors when they occur. And the same goes for children. You know, the 6 stages framework, I talk about it as a golden thread which can run through organizations, right? From recruitment to hiring, from policies to practice, supervision and appraisal, and also retention and succession. But it can also be used as a tool within schools. So it's about giving children and young people the language to talk about their experiences so that they can better challenge discriminatory behavior and racism when they come face to face with it. Because I've come across a lot of young people and adults who said to me, actually, I was shocked when that happened to me, because they were so removed from understanding what racism is that they had really kind of failed to really realize exactly how racism manifests, whether it be within schools or whether it's within the workplace.
Thank you for that. Now, I would like you to spend some words on the language. You see, before I was saying that you are in an important position to help us understand, or maybe I should use another word, to decode some of these terms, because they might appear simple, but they're not really simple. Around 2014, I did a documentary that I titled Creating the Blackness of Africa. And yeah, I sort of have a very hard line on that, and I still hold it today. Are we, because you use the term black a number of times, no? This is a word that I see a lot of people use it, particularly in the UK or in the United States, for example. But very soon then we'll be saying African diaspora or African Americans or things like that. The other day I was listening to a speech, or actually an interview, where Morgan Freeman was talking. Morgan Freeman said, well, I am not African American. I am not African. Well, so what is actually the right word to describe us so that it would be appropriate? What do you say about that?
I think that there are lots of different words, right? And I think there's something, in my mind, there's something about not making more divisions than we need to, right? So I think at the end of the day, people from the African diaspora, yes, that describes Black people, but there's some Black people who will not feel that best describes them. So I think there's something about using different words which relate and speak to different people. I suppose I don't necessarily think that I don't feel that we should calm down hard on people for not necessarily identifying with particular terminology. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Only that I was expanding on that argument. I was sort of saying, if I was in Nigeria, for example, I will hardly ever use the word black to describe me or to describe another Nigerian. If I were in Senegal, the same would be true. If I were in Zimbabwe, the same would be true. But now I am in Europe, that word is very close to my mouth almost all the time. And again, is probably because I am trying to fit into the narrative of the time or the space that I'm living in. Because now, whom am I is a question. Who am I in Nigeria or Senegal a few minutes ago is no longer the same as who am I in Europe. Because if I couldn't say I was black in Senegal in order to talk to a Senegalese person, or a Zimbabwean to talk to a Zimbabwe person, or to talk to a Congolese to say to better explain who am I, how come suddenly I am in Germany, I am in France, I am in US, I'm in UK, I need to do that? What is happening there?
Well, I think that it's about spaces. For me, it's about spaces and identities, right? It's about we move through different spaces, whether that be within our kind of mother country, in Africa, or whether that be when we are in European countries or whatever. We're moving through different spaces, and I think there's something about evolving identities as we learn to navigate those spaces. And being black, or being from the African diaspora, there isn't one entity, there isn't one shape or form of what that looks like. I think there's something about recognizing that there are lots of different identities, and there are lots of different ways of existing within those, within those descriptors. And I think sometimes, we can cause more divisions amongst ourselves by not accepting each other as black people, because we kind of sort of say, well, actually, that person is not as black as I am. Do you know what I mean? It's almost like, the terminology and the language they use does not embody the language I see as being absolutely right in describing black people today. Black people come in many shapes and sizes, and with many different identities. And there's got to be space within that to support people to define themselves, but also to explore who they are, whilst also supporting them to understand what bias and racism looks like, so that for those black people who have become so assimilated, they don't really recognize themselves as black, right? Because there will be some people like that. No, they've become so assimilated, they believe that racism does not exist. They've become so assimilated that they believe that every black person has got the same opportunities and chances that they had. For those black people, when they come up against racism for the first time, the impact on them, the impact on their mental health is devastating. And I have a lot of, black men coming to me in their 50s who have basically been assimilated within the UK, and they'll say, I didn't think racism existed. I was doing fine. And then I have just experienced racism. And I'm having to now muscle up the resources to deal with it and to challenge it. But a lot of the work they're having to do is with themselves, and the support they need from me as a black psychologist and as a psychologist who is an expert in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and in anti-racism awareness. The support they need from me starts with them as a person, and helping them to understand their identity, and really kind of square up and make sense of who they are, and some of the challenges they have faced and why.
All right, thank you for that. I wouldn't take it further than that, though I would really have loved to, because that is an episode of itself, this question. Because, like I said, it is important for me. Because I remember that time, 2014, I was trying to make a comparison, say things like, because when we say black as in place of a person, okay, like black as in Africa, therefore African as a black person, and therefore we are very comfortable to use terms like black music, Black Friday, Black Sunday. Then, okay, we can also put black cats. Then we have a white European, white music, white day, white paper, and all of it. Only that when we take them down to start explaining how we are interpreting the same color to represent people, when we start having a lot of dissonance there. But it's okay. We'll have a day for that.
And honestly, don't get me wrong.
Mhm.
Terminology is important,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
But I think there's something about the degrees to which we allow terminology to get in the way of having the conversations we need to be having. Right? So, terminology is very important, but I also feel that it shouldn't be something which closes the door to education and to having conversations about differences.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. All right. Now, tell me a bit about how are you approaching diversity or inclusiveness? That is the right word there. Of course, they are not really far away from each other. Diversity and inclusion in the society. In this case, we're looking at the UK society. What are your approach that maybe other people can also learn from? Because there are people that are listening to this podcast. They are not in UK, but they might learn from you. So share some of your approaches with us, please.
Yeah, I mean, my approach is really center around the 6 stages framework, my book, and the toolkits from the 6 stages framework. So I've actually got a conference coming up for those of you who are in the UK on the 28th of January, and it's called, it's called, bringing different professionals together to talk, to navigate and think about issues around equality, diversity, and inclusion. So bringing different professional lenses, right? And within that, and that really kind of, looks at some of the work I'm doing within this area. So I work with a lot of organizations where I look at how I can support them to embed the 6 stages framework, into their organization. So as I said before, it's not just a one-off training where you just kind of tick a box. It's about looking at the 6 stages framework as a golden thread which can run right through, the organization. So a lot of the work I do, centers around the 6 stages framework. I use the prejudice racism spectrum as a tool. I use the 6 stages framework as a way of supporting people to identify where they are in their journey in terms of understanding and dealing with racism. And I also use diversity assessments where I support people to, as a way of kind of getting baseline measures to identify where they are in their understanding, and to then identify goals and next steps to support them to move in a positive way in terms of in terms of their development. And I do that work not only with individuals but also with organizations in getting them to to really kind of explore how they can become more inclusive and how they can move towards becoming anti-discriminatory organizations.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. Now, people that have listened to you to this point, they want to get a copy of this book, or they want to connect with you, they want to learn more about what you do. What is the best way to reach out to you? So spend these few seconds advertising what you're doing.
Okay, so the best way to get in touch with me is probably you can send me an email, and that would be Shungu, that's SHUNGU, Shungu at 6stagesframework.com. Or you can just go directly to my website, 6stagesframework.com, and you'll be able to access a contact form on there and get more information. I also do a lot of workshops and seminars on Eventbrite. I've got a following of about 500 people on Eventbrite. So if you put in 6 Stages Framework, or if you put in Dr. Shungu Mgadzah, you'll be able to follow me on Eventbrite. You can also follow me on LinkedIn by putting in those details. But I love to have conversations, so I'm always happy to have a Zoom conversation. So send me a message. If you've bought my book and you've read it and you want to discuss it, the ideas in my book, send me a message and we can talk about that. And above all, I'm always looking for people to collaborate with, right? So, I'm only one person. I've now got a team of people who are volunteering and supporting me in creating further toolkits. Some of them are psychologists, some of them are teachers, some of them are, I work within, within businesses. And we're building a team, and I've just set up the 6 Stages Framework board. We're building a team of people who can look at how we can really kind of roll out and embed the 6 Stages Framework into society. And the final thing, I'm also working with the Church of England, to look at how we use some of the toolkit within the 6 Stages Framework to support some of the work they're doing. I've had a lot of, organizations like the Church of England approaching me as a consultant to support them in their work around differences.
That's very interesting. We appreciate the work that you are doing. It is very important. We need it in the community. All right. So what would be your final thought here, considering what we have discussed today? What kind of message would you like to leave the people with?
I think, there's the message of hope, right? I think there's something about this work is so important. We need to be not only starting with ourselves and doing the work ourselves and checking our biases, but we also need to be supporting others to engage with this work as well. I think, the message is very much around the fact that we're all on a journey in our understanding, right? Let's not be too harsh with each other. Let's take the space and time to identify where individuals are in their journey and to offer the support which they require to progress in their understanding. But for those people who are not willing to learn, there's also a need for us to be able to challenge discriminatory behavior when we see it, and to be able to have the words and the language to challenge it, so that we can support them to learn by actually showing them that actually those behaviors are not acceptable.
Thank you so much for that, Hilda. I appreciate the conversation, also the value that you shared here. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.